So when we talk about subjects like life extension or radical longevity or reversing the aging process, we actually have a lot of images that kind of come to mind. Our culture has provided us with all these stories, all these pictures of what this might be like or what might happen. So maybe the first thing that comes to mind for you is the picture of Dorian Gray, where the portrait is always aging, but the person stays the same. Or maybe you think of something like people drinking the blood of virgins, or searching for the fountain of youth somewhere in Florida. Or maybe you think of something like the legend of the vampire, who is an immortal being who has to feed on mortals, to drink their blood and give up his own soul in order to maintain that immortality. Maybe you think of something more recent like Jupiter Ascending, a movie where some people live tens of thousands of years by bathing in what I take to be liquefied human remains. Or something like Elysium, where the rich people live on a space station, an Edenic paradise in the sky, and their bodies are constantly rejuvenated. But the poor people live on Earth and they're starving. These are some of the ideas that come to mind. And so when we talk about these subjects as real possibilities, a lot of times what happens is people say, well, we know what that would be like, right? We already understand. It would actually be a dystopia. Actually, no one would want to live in that world. Actually, it would start off positive, but then it would turn negative. Actually, only the rich would ever have access to this. Or actually, why would I even want to have those extra years? Because they would just be full of pain and misery. These are some of the things that people feel like and the ways they react to this sort of discussion, because this is what our culture has provided us with, right? And it's mostly negative. It's mostly a negative sort of sense of what life extension might be like. So it's interesting that when we look at the scriptures, we get a very different image. In Isaiah 65:20, Isaiah looks forward to a time when no one would die in infancy, and the person who dies at 100 would be thought a mere child. He's envisioning a world that's so overflowing with life and goodness and thriving and peace that when we hit 100 years old, we feel like we're just getting started. This is just the beginning of what we're going to be able to do and accomplish and experience. And in casting this vision, this amazing positive vision of peace and life, the prophet connects two things that sometimes we like to keep separate: our physicality and our spirituality. And in our world, sometimes we think that these are two separate and even competing ideas. Sometimes people think that to be a spiritual person is to downplay the significance of life, to not care as much about what happens in the world or in our lives or in our physical existence. To be spiritual is to learn to focus on things that we can't see and to not care about things that we can. Even outside of Christianity, this is a common attitude. This is the thought of a lot of people, what spirituality means, learning not to care so much. And within American Christianity, it's a rampant attitude. It's so pervasive. And I think it would have shocked the first Christians. Because for them, the resurrection of Jesus wasn't just a body coming back from the dead. It was the sign, the declaration of God's commitment to the world. It was the declaration that God had committed himself to bringing life in the face of death and to push back death from his universe as he reclaimed and redeemed creation. Christians understood this as the mission of God. And so Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 talks about the resurrection as this process that starts with Jesus and spreads out through his followers out into all the world until death itself is finally eradicated. And in Romans 8, he talks about the time when this comes to fill the entire cosmos, till all creation itself is liberated to enjoy the freedom and the glory of the children of God. this is this huge vision that the Christians had, and they believed that they could play a part in it. This is why Jesus sends out his disciples to heal the sick and to feed the hungry and to free the captives. He's inviting them to participate. He's inviting them to play a role in this process. And for this reason, Christians have always understood healing to be a significant part of the Christian mission. And you can look around today and find hospitals with names like St. Thomas or St. John's or St. Mary's. It's not an accident. Christians have always understood that this is part of what we do. This is part of what it means to be the church in the world, to be Christians in the world, to participate in pursuing the will of God on earth as it is in heaven. So we're now in our kind of modern technological civilization looking at new possibilities for extending this work. Projects like Google's Calico Labs or Aubrey de Grey's SENS Foundation are attempting to fight the aging process itself. And so there are all kinds of questions. How should we feel about this? What should be our level of involvement in this? Should we be positive or negative towards these kind of efforts? So let's kind of step back and get a little bit of context. So in the year 1900, the primary way that people died was due to infectious disease. Most people died by catching an illness. And for all of human history behind that, that had been the case. For the vast majority of human history, most of us died with some kind of infectious disease. And as a result, our lives were very short. In the last 100 years, we've changed that dramatically. Now the primary way that most of us die is due to heart disease or cancer. After that, things like stroke and dementia and some other aspects like that we would tend to call the diseases of aging. We've changed the way humans die. And in changing the way humans die, we've extended our lifespan. When we started out, we were, maybe 20 or 30 years. That was what humans could expect. And now we've extended that to 40, 50, 60, 70, now 80. And if we cure some of these diseases, like heart disease, cancer, dementia, then we're going to move that bar again. We're going to extend life farther. We're going to change how we die and change when we die. So there are a lot of different kinds of theories about aging and illness and death. And I'm not a doctor and I'm not a scientist, so I can't really analyze all that for you. But what we can do is we can talk about one leading theory of how aging works and use that to kind of look into what's on the table, what's being considered by some of these projects. So I want to talk about the theory behind Aubrey de Grey's work. Now, Aubrey de Grey argues that aging is simply the accumulation of cellular damage. So as human beings living in the world, kind of going about our business 24 hours a day, we experience all kinds of environmental stress, right? Whether it's from radiation, whether it's from bacteria or other kinds of disease-carrying beings, whether it's from stress, toxins, whatever. We experience all kind of attack and damage to our bodies. And that's just part of how we live. And fortunately, our bodies are really, really good at repairing this damage. And so we're constantly in a state of repair and things being replaced. The vast majority of our cells are replaced something like every 7 years. We're constantly being updated, right? Our bodies fix themselves. They repair and replace and upgrade what's going on and try to make it better. The problem is they can't quite keep up with all of the damage all of the time. And so sometimes we experience more damage than we're able to fix. And when that happens, then it starts to accumulate. And over time, some of these small damages build up and into larger scales of damage. and it begins to cascade into bigger problems and bigger problems and bigger problems, and eventually whole systems start to fail. And when we see a system fail, then we call that disease. So ultimately, there are two ways that people die. People either die from accident or from illness. And sometimes we talk about dying due to natural causes, but natural causes are just the diseases that we anticipate, that we expect people to get, right? We expected this to come, and so we think of it as natural. But it's not just that, oh, they hit a certain age or they hit a certain number on the calendar and now people die. That's not how it works, right? We accumulate damage. We experience damage from the world, and when we're not able to keep up with the process of healing, of fixing what goes wrong, then ultimately it cascades into disease that brings about death. So Aubrey de Grey asks a question. First of all, what kinds of cellular damage do we experience? And he kind of put out a call for people to identify other kinds of cellular damage, things that he hadn't yet been made aware of. And as of yet, we only have 7 different kinds of cellular damage that we know about, that humans experience in a human body. And so de Grey's next question was, well, what if we could repair one of those kinds of damage? If we could repair and fix and roll back some of that damage of one particular kind, then we would extend human life by another decade, maybe more. If we could repair 2 kinds of damage, then we would extend human life even farther. And if we could repair all 7 kinds of cellular damage that we experience, then we would actually extend human life indefinitely. And we would have brought an end to the aging process as we know it. So what does that mean? Let's talk about some ramifications. Well, first of all, this is not the end of death. We're not talking about eradicating death from the world. We're talking about changing the way humans die. We still walk in front of buses. We still have catastrophes and crises and all kinds of calamities in our world. And so we can't fix that, right? This is simply changing the manner in which we die and the way in which we age and how we relate to those processes. So this would dramatically affect how we think of aging, what we think it is, and what we think is going on. Instead of seeing life as this kind of gradual ascent, then followed by an inevitable descent into kind of decay and ultimately death, we would see life as this rising opportunity to experience new things, to discover new things, to relate to other people, to experience health and productivity. It would change our whole culture, right? Instead of having this sense that youth is what matters, we would develop a sense that age is actually the great thing to have, this experience. Because we know that experience and learning is wonderful. But currently we associate that process with this process of illness and inevitable decay, and that doesn't have to be the case. We could change that, right? We could change the sense that people bring to understanding age and maturity and all of those things. And in that process, we would dramatically reduce human suffering. Currently, the majority of medical expenses are spent in the last year of someone's life. And I think this is a reason that a lot of people are really hesitant about ideas about life extension. They think we're talking about taking that last year and stretching it out over another 50 years. And that's not what we're talking about, right? We're not talking about another 50 years as a 90-year-old. We're talking about another 50 years as a 30 or 40-year-old. We're talking about extending the healthy and productive and relational parts of our lives. And so instead of spending all of our medical expense in that last year of life trying to hold on in this very painful and kind of tedious way, we can instead spread out our medical treatment throughout our lives and establish health and productivity and thriving and all of the things that we kind of look for in a full and happy existence. So one thing that I would like to see this create is what I like to call the great-great-grandmother effect. So anthropologists say that when human lifespan was 20 or 30 years, we never got to experience our grandparents, right? By the time we hit an age where we were really much aware, our grandparents were gone. When human lifespan extended a little bit more, then suddenly we could have grandparents who are around. We could have grandmothers who were there to pass on knowledge to their grandkids. And suddenly we had access to knowledge and wisdom that it took a lifetime to discover. And it profoundly affected human civilization. Anthropologists call this the grandmother effect. And I wonder if we were able to extend life again to where you not only got to see your grandchildren, but your grandchildren's grandchildren, maybe we would experience a great-great-grandmother effect, where we get to benefit from the wisdom that it would take 100 years to discover, right? How think about having the opportunity to learn not just from 30 years of wisdom, not just even from 60 years, but 100, 120, 150, 200 years of experience and wisdom. The world could experience an explosion of wisdom and with all kinds of incredible benefits. So that's one thing that we might kind of look for as a potential positive ramification of this. So let's talk about some things from a kind of Christian and philosophical perspective. So first of all, what we're talking about is continuous with current medical treatment. What I mean is that medicine as it's practiced now is an effort to repair and restore things that are broken. Things that have gone wrong, we want to fix them to restore normal, human, healthy functioning. And that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about something dramatically new that, that medicine has never done. We're talking about doing that at a deeper level, fixing the illnesses, fixing the problems before they become life-threatening, before they kind of boil up to these dramatic problems that we can never quite fix. If we could address them earlier in the process, if we could address them at a deeper level, if we could address them at the cellular level, then we would be doing medicine better than we've ever done before. The same kind of thing, but it would be extending human life and changing that aging process. So it's continuous with current medical care. It's an extension of how medicine works now. Secondly, healing is a huge part of the Christian mission. Like we said, Christians have always understood their work to involve healing, and this is a way to extend that effort to reduce human suffering. Thirdly, we're talking about bringing about extended human lifespans. And when we discuss that, we need to realize that this is something that the scriptures long for, that the prophets in the Old Testament are looking for eagerly. It's something so positive in the scriptures. And we've talked about Isaiah 65 and Isaiah's vision of what this would look like. But we can go back even farther to the early chapters of Genesis. And in Genesis, we see the patriarchs living hundreds, almost 1,000 years. And the problem is we come to these kind of passages a lot of time as an apologetics stance. If you're on the more conservative side, you're there to say, see, this is in the Bible and you better believe it or else. And if we're on the more liberal side, we're there to say, see, the Bible contains myth. And both of those approaches miss the point. Why is this here? Why is it being told? Why are we being told about these people who have these extraordinary lifespans? And I think the answer is because we're being told that this is a world blessed by God. These people are living much closer to God's intent for the world. And this is what the blessing of God looks like. It looks like life. It looks like the ability to experience your grandchildren's grandchildren, to experience 10 generations of human existence and change. And so the scriptures carry that focus all through them, where life is understood to be this glorious and wonderful thing that we hold on to, that we cherish, that we push for, that we fight for in every way and in every aspect. And that goes straight on through Isaiah and on to the New Testament, where healing is a central part of what Jesus and his disciples do. So I want to talk about one last kind of big question. When it comes to this sort of discussion, a lot of people are thinking something along the lines of, are we talking about becoming immortal? And the answer is no. This is not immortality. We're still subject to being hit by buses, to being hit by stray comets and meteors, to having a local supernova explode and destroy us. We're still in the universe. We can still suffer. We still have to struggle to work for better things, to fight for life. All this does is extend life a little bit more. Now, at the same time, I've just been saying that God is on this mission. That God is on this mission to bring life to the whole creation. And that in that process, everything we do, from feeding the hungry, to caring for the poor, to taking care of prisoners, to working on medical advances, is part of that process. It's a step in the unfolding of God's will, God's mission. And it's a step, but it's not the last step. It's one part, but it's not the entirety. It's not the whole. And if you think about, if you were granted the ability to have 500 or 1,000 years of biological life, would you be able to experience and enjoy all of that life? Well, if you live in a society that is violent, that is in decay and disrepair, that is dysfunctional, then the likely answer is no, you probably wouldn't. We only get to experience life if we have a world that is stable and peaceful to live in. And so we can't ever separate these things out. If you are only concerned about the medical side of things, but don't care for your community, for your world, then you're overlooking a huge, huge aspect of what's involved here. So Christians can never separate these things. Our efforts for the poor, our efforts to help those who are hurting, and our efforts to advance medical science and technology all have to be understood as part of the same big picture, part of the same holistic mission that God is on and invites us into. So we've covered a lot of ground, and there are a lot of questions to discuss, a lot of other kind of things to explore along these lines. But I think this is a good starting point. And the things we've covered essentially are that this is continuous with current medical care. This is an extension of medicine as it's currently practiced. This is a way for Christians to advance their mission, their call to engage in healing. This is pursuing longer lives, which is something the Bible longs for, the biblical prophets look forward to eagerly. It's not the whole, it's not the end. It's one step in a bigger process that God calls us into. But for all of those reasons, I think this is a huge thing that we can and should participate in. It's something that we have the opportunity to move forward, to reduce human suffering, to make the world better. It's one of the ways, not the only way, not all of the ways, but it's one of the ways, and it's a significant way. So for these reasons, I think that Christians should embrace radical life extension.